Today's daf we're going to learn is Chagigah Ted Zayin, continuing with these very interesting dapim. We're going to learn about Rabbi Akiva today and then move on to some other topics. In addition to comparing angels to demons and humans to animals or angels. And at the very end, so stick with us till the end, it's a pretty long daf, we're going to get to women opting into mitzvot aseh shazman gram. Okay, unfortunately, it's at the end of the daf. We're not going to have a long time to go into it. There's actually an article on the site that went up today from Deracheha about it. There's a lot more to be said on that topic. This isn't the key sugya about it, and it's really getting to it from kind of on the side. So I do promise we will deal with that much more, especially when we get to Kiddushin, which I guess isn't so far away anymore. Today's daf is sponsored by Sigal Spitzer in honor of Abby Flamholtz. Happy big birthday. May this just be the beginning of your Talmud Torah journey. And today's daf is sponsored by Viti Rosenzweig Kunz for the Refuah Shlema of Matityahu ben Rosa and Sarah Bat Vita. Okay, we're going to get started from the bottom of Tet Zayin Amud Bet. Rabbi Akiva Allah b'shalom v'yarad b'shalom. Remember, he succeeds. He's the one who succeeds of getting into the Pardes, seeing God, and leaves in peace. Okay, notice that he does leave, right? It's not like he stays there, which is interesting. Allah v'katuv omer. The pasuk was said about him, Mashcheni acharecha narutza. Okay, right? Come with me and we will run together, right? He was able to kind of be in the presence of God. Even though he succeeded, the angels said, well, what are you doing up here, right? You don't belong here. And God says to the angels, no, leave him. Okay, he belongs here. Very fascinating. My darash. Now, the question here seems to be, how did he know where the place of God is? Okay, Rashi says, Mehechan hevin makom shechina shenishar shelo hitzitz sham. This is interesting. Rashi says, how did he know where the Shechina was so he would know not to look at it? Because he knew like where the boundaries were. Davar inami, Rashi makes a different interpretation, shelo ta'ak, Moshe ta'a acher, or how did he not make the same mistake? Like Acher thought there was another Rishut up there. He saw Mitaton and thought that was God. So he was much more accurate about identifying there's God and there's only one God. So Amar Rabba, we're going to have several different verses that are going to prove this, like how he knew. Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan ve'ata mirevot kodesh. This is part of the Shirah of Ha'azinu at the end of the Torah. Ata usually means he came. Okay, it's actually Aramaic. Mirevot kodesh. So what do they say? Ot hu berevava shelo. They darshan the word ata as an ot. There was a sign among all the rivavot, the tens of thousands of angels that were up there. God had a sign on him. He stood separate. And that's how Rabbi Akiva knew. It's actually funny because, not funny, but Rashi says, how did he know not to look? Right? He had to look to notice the sign in order not to know not to look. But again, we're going to talk about today what it means to look. To look doesn't necessarily mean just to look. To look means to stare at or to try to grapple with or analyze or look too much. Okay, because we're going to see certain things that you're not allowed to look at. And it's going to be connected, right? Again, this is obviously all connected to the whole topic of our Masechet of Ri'iyat Pnei Hashem on the Rega, right? Going to see God and what it means to see God, right? We're in the same theme of seeing God as we've seen in a number of places, the seeing issue. Rabbi Avahu Amar, Dagul Merivava. Okay, so what is Dagul? Dagul usually means, right, a word of kind of strength, power, Merivava. So what does this mean? Dugumahu Berivava Shelo. Okay, they take this dagul from duguma. He stood out differently from his rivava. It's the same idea, it's just from a different pasuk. Rish Lakish Amar Hashem Tzvaot Shemo. God of the hosts is his name. What's the name of Hashem? From the language of Adonut, the Lord. So Adonhu B'tzava Shelo. He's the Lord of everybody, right? You know, when you walk into a room, certainly if you're in, let's say, the army, you know exactly who's in charge, right? And who's below. They make it very clear with the ranks. So that makes it very clear who's in charge. So here also, he was clearly the one who was the Adon, who was managing the whole thing up there. And that's how he knew. Okay, and here's a description. Eliyahu, after he has this whole stand down with Achav, then he goes off on his own and it kind of meets God. So it says here, God describes to him, okay, I'll read the beginning of the verse. Go stand on the mountain before God. And God will pass. There's going to be this big wind. Lo beruach Hashem. God is not in the wind. I'm now back to the Gemara. Okay, the Gemara is quoting it from mid-verse. After the wind, there'll be a noise. Lo berash Hashem. He's not in the noise. V'achar harash esh, after the rash, there'll be fire. Lo be'esh Hashem, that's not God either. V'achar ha'esh, kol dmama daka v'nei Hashem over. You're going to hear a very soft voice, and then God is going to pass. This is obviously where we get it from Unitana Tokef, right? When we talk, all these images appear there, and the kol dmama daka yishama, right? And that's God. So this is Eliyahu, Becky. This is what I said. This is Eliyahu. This is the speech to Eliyahu that God says, that's where you're going to see me. Tanu, okay, so these are all different options of how he knew. Okay, so either he knew because it was this kol dmama daka, or he stood right aside from everyone, or right, he had a sign on him, or all these things that were signs that God was different. Tanu Rabbanan, shisha dvarim ne'emuru b'shedim. There were 6 things said about, if you want to describe evil spirits, demons, however you want to call them, which we've come across in the Gemara before. If you're new and this is your first Masechet and you haven't come in contact with them, we'll see them in all sorts of places, these evil spirits that float around and punish people or scare people. So what do we say about these things? There's 6 things. This is kind of putting them in their place. They're somewhere in between angels and humans. So in 3 ways, they're like angels. In 3 ways, they're like humans. 3 like the angels. How so? They have wings. They could be one place in the world and a second later appear somewhere else, right? Which obviously us as humans can't do, right? Unless you take supersonic airplanes and, really fast ones, but even so, it takes a little while, right? They can just immediately appear somewhere else. And they know what's going to be in the future. So the Gemara asks on that one minute. This is, we again connecting to the previous story. Elisha ben Avuya, he heard mechorei pargod, right up in the heavens. It's that they have access to the upper world and they can hear things that go on there. In what 3 ways are like humans? They eat and drink like humans. Parim v'ravim, in other words, angels don't eat or drink. Parim v'ravim kibnei adam, they reproduce like, right? If you remember, we saw some demons that were the daughter of or the son of. So they reproduce as opposed to angels. Remember, we saw angels just keep getting created either in the mouth of God or there's other ways they get created. Umetim kibnei adam, and they're mortal like humans. They die, whereas angels, even though we did see angels died, but I don't know, but I guess they don't die in normal human kind of way, whereas the evil spirits do. Humans, in 3 ways they're like angels, and right? Humans are somewhere in between animals and angels. So the 3 that are like angels, they have knowledge. They walk straight, tall, as opposed to animals that go on all 4s. They speak the Hebrew language as opposed to, right, animal language or just kind of grunting noises, things like that. In 3 ways, they're like animals. They eat like animals, right? They eat and drink, which again, angels don't. They reproduce, same thing we saw before, and they let out excrement, like, right, we have wastes in our body that leave our body in the way like animals do as opposed to the angels. We're now back to the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah had said, if you look at these 4 things, better off you had not been born. Remember, malamala, malamata, what's up, what's down, what's before the creation of the world, what's after the creation of the world. So Bishlama, we understand malamala, malamata, malacho. What's above the heavens, what's below the ground, what's in front of us. But Ela Lifanim, what happened before, who cares what happened before creation? We can talk about that. It was already, right? As I understand, you don't want to talk about what's going to be in the future. Who am I to say I understand what's going to be in the future? But what happened in the past happened. It's history. I could just talk about it. What's the big deal? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar de Amrei Travayu, both of them said, Mashal Melech Basar Vadam Shamar Avadav Benu Li Palterin Gdolin Alashpa. Okay, it's like a king who says to his servants, build me a palace on a garbage dump. They went and they built it. And they say, right, it's for the king to mention that it was on a garbage dump once. right, seems really inappropriate. It actually reminds me, there's this place in Ranana called Har HaZevel. It used to be a garbage dump. And it's kind of nice now. I mean, if you go in the winter, it's all dried out. But if you go in the summer, it's all like now, it's all green and beautiful. But it's called a garbage dump. It just seems weird. We always say, oh, we're going to Har HaZevel, the garbage dump. And it seems a little bit strange. But you kind of forget that the name really means just garbage dump. But anyway, you don't really want to say, oh, God built the world on a garbage dump. So you don't want to talk about how it was before, because it was really not anything respectful. And now for us to basically turn it into something, right? Now that it's a beautiful world, we don't want to start mentioning its origins. Okay, so what does it mean to be chas al kvod kono? Okay, this means not to have sympathy or right for the respect of your creator. Okay, so chas is not exactly sympathy. We'll have to explain it a little better as we see. Mahi. So what does this mean? If you look, again, we're going to get back to things you're not allowed to look at. If you look at a rainbow, that's not having respect for God. So you might say, what do you mean? We all look at rainbows. We get so excited when we see a rainbow. We take pictures. We show everybody. So it seems to not really mean looking at a rainbow like that, but it means, and that's why I said it depends what you mean by look. Look is to really look at it and maybe try to understand it better and to see God inside of there, okay? In a sense of trying to look at God and the way God creates the world. Again, it's still kind of hard to understand, to grapple with, but anyway, Rabbi Abba Amar Zeh Mistakal B'Keshet. Rabbi Yosef doesn't think that that's what it is. He says, Amar Zeh Over Avera B'Seter. Someone who doesn't have respect, it's almost like not having respect for your creator. Why? If you respect your creator, you believe that the creator, right, God can see everything that goes on in the world. So if I say I'm going to go sin in secret, it's because I'm scared of people, that people will see me. But I'm not scared that God doesn't see me. That basically has total disregard for respect of God, because I'm basically saying, oh, I assume God can't see me, so let me do it, hide and do it hidden. Obviously, no one will see me. So we'll talk about this idea in a few minutes, even a little bit more. So now they want to know, Mistakal B'Keshet, where do we get these things from? That better you should not have been created. Dichtiv. Okay, we're in a verse from Yechezkel. He describes, this is from the Maraseh Merkavah. He describes that it looked like a rainbow. Okay, so here they basically want to say, right, we don't want you to look at a rainbow because that's the Maraseh Merkavah, right? It looked like the way it looks in the heavens is like a keshet, right, that you find in a cloud on a rainy day. So basically, by looking at a rainbow and really looking at it, it's like looking at God. So you shouldn't do that. Rabbi Yosef Amar Zeh Over Avera B'Seter. Where does he get it from? Rabbi Yitzchak, as Rabbi Yitzchak says. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol Over Avera B'Seter, Ki'ilu Dochek Aglei HaShechina. It's like you're pushing off the feet of the Shechina. Why? Shene'emar Kol Amar Hashem Hashamayim Kisi Va'aretz Adom Raglai. Remember, God says, we've seen this verse a few times recently, the heaven is my throne, and the land, right, the earth is where I keep my feet. So it's basically saying, I'm kicking your feet out. I don't believe they're really here. And that's why you do it secretly, because you don't really believe God is there. So now the Gemara asks about this. Ini, is this really true? V'ha amal, is it so bad to do an avera b'seter, to do it hidden, right? What, better do it publicly? Let's see this source, which shows don't do it publicly. V'ha Rabbi Elazar, which seems to imply if don't do it publicly, do it privately. We'll see why. You'll see in a minute. Rabbi Elazar says, if you see someone, or you are in that situation where your yetzer has gotten the better of you, your evil inclination is pulling you to sin, what should you do? Okay, you might remember this. We saw this not long ago. You should, right? I forget where exactly it was. Let's look. It was in, was it Masechet Shabbat? I'm sure we saw this somewhere else also. Oh, no, I looked at the wrong one. It's in Moed Katan. Okay, I knew we just saw it. It's in Moed Katan. So it says, right, I'm looking at the Dalet here. It sends, if you have a Dalet in your text, it sends you the Masoret Hashas, which tells you where you can find it in the Gemara. So he basically says, what should you do? Go to a place where nobody knows you, wear black clothes. Okay, why? Because that basically puts you down. It makes you right. As soon as when you're a king and where you live, but then you go somewhere else, nobody knows who you are, you become a nobody. That basically, a lot of what causes sin is your pride. So if you take that out of the picture, that will probably help you. However, and it's missing the words here, but what it means is if it doesn't help you, then at least when you're in this new place where nobody knows you, it's very interesting. They're almost, right? You can sin. I mean, obviously, they don't really mean you can sin, but if you have no choice and you're going to sin, at least do it somewhere else where nobody knows you. And then it'll be, as we call beseter, much more not public, because nobody knows you. Like nobody pays attention to what you're doing, right? When people know you and they see you doing something, they'll all pay attention. But we don't want you to desecrate God's name, right? If there's someone who's like the same way Elisha ben Avuya went to this prostitute, and then she said, "Aren't you Elisha ben Avuya?" And then he basically, instead of saying, "Yes, I am," right, which would have been a big chilul Hashem, he basically shows her that he's not Elisha ben Avuya, and that's why she calls him Acher. You must be someone else, right? Because it's a way he understood he was sinning, right? But it was a way of doing it almost, not making a big deal about I'm Elisha ben Avuya and I'm sinning. Okay, so here it says you should do it kind of secretly. Again, it doesn't really mean behind closed doors, but it means where nobody really knows you, no one's going to be watching. So how could that be? It depends. If you can conquer your yetzer, then don't do it in secret. If you have no choice and you can't, then this is better than the alternative, but it's only if you have no choice in the matter. And then that's how we resolve the contradiction. Darash Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Nachmani mitorgamanei de Rish Lakish. Okay, he darshan from the mitorgaman of Rish Lakish, meaning he had heard the person who disseminated the speech of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish say the following in his name. We're now back to this idea of looking. If you look at these three things, this is what we call midah keneged midah. The punishment fits the crime. If you look at these three things, your eyes, you'll lose your vision, basically, or your vision will go bad. But bekeshet ubenasi ubekohanim. Okay, in the rainbow, you look at a nasi. You're not supposed to look at the nasi. We'll see this all in a minute. And the kohanim. Okay, now it doesn't mean don't ever look at a kohen. What does it mean? Well, I know you're going to tell me when they're duchening, doing Birkat Kohanim, but we're going to see, and we saw this sugya actually already before. It's not necessarily the case. We'll see in a minute exactly the specifics of it. Right? There's many people when the kohanim are blessing the people, they go under a talit. Right? You always tell your kids, don't look, right? This whole thing. So you're going to see that it's not exactly accurate. But this is where it comes from. Bekeshet dichtiv. So why not a keshet? We already saw this verse. It's just a repeat, but here it's because this is part of the three things he was darshaning. It talks about Moshe. They put from God's hod, God's glory, onto Moshe. So basically, looking at a nasi in a real way is like looking at God. These are all things that are either God's presence is there or something of God is there we're not allowed to look at, or it looks like God's presence, like the keshet. Next. Hamistakel b'kohanim bizman shebeit hamikdash kayam. Oh, it's only when the temple is standing. Shayu omdim al duchanan u'mebrakim Israel b'shem ha'meforash. When are you not allowed to look at the kohanim? When they're blessing the people in the temple with the Shem HaMeforash, with the special name of God, because then God's presence was among them, and therefore you're not allowed to look because God's presence is there. In our shuls, right, halavai, God's presence would be there, right? It's not the same kind of thing. It's not Beit HaMikdash. It's not using the Shem HaMeforash, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei name of God. So therefore, this whole thing that people don't do it. Now people, maybe there's a tradition about it, and I'm not saying you should look, but this thing that people all believe, oh, you're going to lose your sight if you do this, this really is in the time of the temple. And this is where it comes from. Now you understand at least the idea behind it, that basically we assume God's presence is there, and that's why we shouldn't be looking. It's not just some voodoo thing, I don't know, don't look, but this is exactly where it comes from. It makes sense. It has good source. You're basically looking at God's presence, and you're not allowed to do that. So since we mentioned something, he darshan from the Torgaman of Rish Lakish that had to do with our sugya, now we're doing another thing that he said. Don't trust a rea, which usually means a friend. Don't trust the aluf, like an important person. If your evil inclination tells you sin and God will forgive you, well, al ta'amin, don't believe your evil inclination. Okay, if you're pulled to do something and say, well, just sin and then you'll do tshuva, don't do that. Don't believe it. Shene'emal, al ta'amin bera. Instead of reading it as rea, don't believe in ra. What is ra? Right? If not, ein ra ela yetzer hara, our evil inclination. Shene'emal, in Parshat Breshit, right? At the end it says Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra minu urav, right? The yetzer of a person is ra. So ra must be the evil inclination. So don't believe the ra is the rea is the ra, which is the evil inclination. Ve'ein aluf ela kadosh baruch hu. And don't trust in the aluf. What does it mean? Don't trust in God. It doesn't mean don't trust in God. It means don't trust that God will forgive you. In other words, don't do things thinking. This is what we talked about not so long ago in Yeshayahu, where he talks about echtav ashuv, right? I'll sin and I'll just repent. You're not allowed to do that. How do we know God is aluf? Shenemar aluf ni'urayata. Okay, here God is called an aluf. Shema tomar mi me'ibi. Now you might say, well, who's going to testify against me, right? If I sin in secret, we're back to this idea of sinning and sinning in secret. If I sin in secret, no one's going to watch. Who's going to testify, right? Maybe God knows, but don't you need witnesses, right? If God is the judge, let's say, you go to judgment, you need witnesses. Who's going to witness it? So we're going to have a bunch of different opinions. The stones of your house and your walls are going to testify because, right, if you say, oh, I'm in my house, who's going to see? Well, guess what? The walls have eyes. Okay, if you're right. How do we know walls have eyes? Well, it says, it doesn't actually say they have eyes, but it says, the stones of the wall will cry out. And it'll answer like a beam. Okay, so here we have the beams of the house and the stones can actually speak. Again, it's not meant to be understood literally, but the idea is don't think nobody's watching, right? There's testimony here, right? Thank you for correcting. It's a chip of the beams will testify, right? And it's just even a stone in the wall and just a chip of the beams, right? Even a little bit of it can cry out. Okay, your own soul will come testify against you. You should watch what you say from the one who dwells in your bosom. Now, this could be someone else who dwells, like your spouse, but the way they understand it is it's your neshama that dwells in your bosom. The two angels that go around with you in the world, they're the ones who are going to testify. There's a pasuk that says that basically everyone has malachim, two angels that basically, right, and this comes up in all sorts of places, like Shalom Aleichem also in the prayer we say Friday nights. Tonight you'll say it. But there's this idea that there's two angels that take you and protect you. Now, it's interesting. They protect you, but the point is, yes, it's very nice they're protecting you, but that means they're always there and they're watching and they'll come up and testify against you, which is interesting because they're theoretically there to protect you, but in the end, they can go against you if you kind of mess up. Your own limbs will testify against you. Okay, you're my witnesses. Here it's talking about your own body will testify against you. So it's kind of the same thing as your soul, but it's here saying even your body can come and testify against you. You're going to testify against yourself when you get up to the heavens. So don't think that nobody's watching because you know, and you in the end will become, which is interesting, you'll end up testifying against yourself. Okay, that's the end of this big section. We're now going to move on to a new Mishnah. Okay, again, lots more to be said about this. There's a lot. I know there were a lot of discussions about this yesterday. This whole topic is fascinating topic, but we're going to move on. This Mishnah, Rashi already says, before I even read, Rashi says, if you look at the second line in Rashi on the Mishnah, it's 5 lines from the bottom of the page here. Zohi machloket rishona shaita b'chachmei Yisrael. We're now going to learn the first machloket. Rashi says this is the first basic machloket there was. Okay, if we go historically, there was the time period of the Zugot, okay, which ended with Hillel and Shammai, which basically puts them at the time of Herod the king. Okay, historically. We had these Zugot, okay? Before we had the real Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, they came out of this, but it all came from these Zugot. There was a pair of rabbis in charge at the time. One was the Nasi and one was the Av Beit Din, okay? Which basically means, right, one Nasi, it's always hard to translate. People translate as prince. It's basically the one in charge. And the Av Beit Din was like the second to the Nasi. Okay, and maybe he was a little more in charge of the Beit Din, although it doesn't seem like that from here. It seems like the Nasi was in charge of the court, and that was his second in command. Okay, so there were these pairs, and the place where you most see them is Pirkei Avot, because really they each, in Pirkei Avot, you have all these statements by them that they made, but they weren't really arguing so much. Arguments really started in the time of Hillel and Shammai. Okay, but this machloket, and you have to wonder, and I don't have a good answer for this, why of all machlokot, this became the Makhlok that spanned the entire generation of the Zugot. And there was a big debate about it. You would not have thought this was a huge topic, which is smicha on korbanot, okay? Leaning on animals. The Ramban, first of all, the very famous Ramban in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra talks about the meaning of smicha. Okay, he differs from the Rambam about the whole perspective on korbanot. I'm not going to get into the Rambam today, but the Ramban shows that this is this ideal system of having animals and that we're placing our sins on the animals. Of course, the Rambam doesn't think it's ideal. He thinks it was done because that's how people worship their gods. And it was created kind of as a parallel to what other people did, but to do it in our own way. Anyway, the Ramban says smicha is all about putting your weight on the animal and transferring your sins onto the animal. Okay, even if it's not a sin-related sacrifice, still you're transferring kind of onto the animal, and the animal's taking it in place of you. And that's this mitzvah of smicha. Okay, we've talked about this before, and we'll see there's a big mitzvah, there's a big machloket here. There's even a machloket about what the machloket's about, which we'll talk about in a minute. But can you do smicha on yantif? Now, what sacrifice are you doing smicha on? Remember the korbanot shlamim? Remember we have the korban shalmei chagigah. We're not talking about voluntary korbanot here because there are no voluntary korbanot on holidays, on the yantif part of the holiday. You can only do these shalmei chagigah, and we'll see there's a machloket. Can you, or like, about smicha, can you do the smicha or not? We did talk about this in Pesachim, yes, I believe we did. So Yossi ben Yoezer, we definitely learned about it in Beitza, okay? I'm not sure, Pesachim maybe also, but definitely in Beitza. Yeah, 1 second. I'm looking here. I'm not sure about Pesachim, but definitely it was in Beitza. Okay, so now we're going to have this big machloket about whether or not you can do smicha on yantif or not. So it should be Yosef ben Yoezer Omer Shelo L'smoch. Okay, now I want you to pay attention because soon the Mishnah is going to tell us. It's just easier if you read the Mishnah already with that thinking, that every time they mention a pair, it's going to go by the first one is the Nasi, who's the main one, and the second one is the second in command, the Av Beit Din. Okay, so then you can see which of the pair was the Nasi, which was the Av Beit Din. Every time it's going to mention one pair, and in that order. Yosef ben Yoezer Omer Shelo L'smoch. He held you cannot do smicha on these korbanot. Okay, again, you have to remember also, this, maybe I'll already get into the two options in Beitza about what this machlok is about. Some people think that the machlok is, since we're talking about shalmei chagigah, which are shlamim, the general korban shlamim needs smicha. So one option, which you'll see the Gemara eventually on our sugya is going to reject it, but it doesn't mean it's an option. Rabbi Yochanan is going to reject it, but the one option is to say that the machloket is, do you do smicha when you have a shlamim, which is a piece of offering that's obligatory? Because when the Torah talks about smicha, it's talking about a voluntary shlamim offering. In our case, we have a unique shlamim, which is a shlamim, which is not voluntary. It's obligatory to bring it on the Chagigah. So is there a requirement of smicha at all or not? That's possible, the machloket. Another, which we'll see from our sugya, they definitely prefer that option, is the question is, can you do it on yantif? Yes, you do smicha, but is it allowed on yantif? Because what's the issue? You're actually using animals. Now, in the Mishnah, in Beitza, on Lamed Vav Amud Bet, it said you can't ride on animals. It didn't say you can't use animals. So the debate here is, can you also not use animals? What does it mean use animals? Well, you're putting your weight, and we'll see later, there's a question. Do you have to do it with all your strength or not? But assuming you're doing it with all your strength, so you're actually using the animal. And maybe that's not allowed to do on yantif. Now, that also is combined, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow, in tomorrow's daf, which is, it's combined with this idea that when do you have to do smicha? It says, v'samach, and then v'shachat. You do smicha, and then you slaughter it. Now, you're going to slaughter the animals on yantif. That you're allowed to do for the sacrifice. The question is, does the smicha have to be right before the shechita? So if it has to be right before the shechita, then you have no choice but to do it on yantif, and then we're going to allow it. Even though maybe you're using animals, and that's a problem, but we're going to allow it because we have no choice. According to those who say you can't, again, this is the second interpretation of the debate, it's saying that you don't have to do smicha right before shechita. If you don't have to do it, well, then do it the day before. Do it erev yantif, because everything you can do erev yantif, especially if it's forbidden to use animals. So do it before, and then you can the next day slaughter your animal. As long as they don't have to be next to each other, then it doesn't matter. Do it before. And that's possibly the debate between them. Okay, so again, it's unclear exactly, which is interesting, right? It's the earliest debate. We don't even know really what they're debating. Okay, so Yosef ben Yoezer, no. Yosef ben Yochanan, yes. Yoshua ben Prachi omer shelo l'smoch. So number one, number two, the Nasi both saying no. The Av Beit Din says, Nitaya arbali omer l'smoch, says yes. Same with the third group. Yehuda ben Tabai omer shelo lismoch, and Shema ben Shatach omer lismoch. Fourth, Shmaya omer lismoch. Now we're going to flip. The Nasi is going to say yes. Avtalyon omer shelo lismoch. Now, what are you ready for? After Shmaya and Avtalyon, who comes? Hillel and Shammai. Guess what? Surprise. Hillel u'Menachem lo nechleku. Who here has heard of Menachem? Okay. We now have a zug that we probably never really heard about, which is Hillel and Menachem. What happened to Hillel and Shammai? So the Mishnah tells us, Yatza Menachem nichnas Shammai. Originally, it was Hillel and Menachem, who, by the way, fascinatingly didn't argue about this. Okay, it almost sounds like because they didn't argue, they got rid of Menachem, which is certainly not the case. But, right, because we want arguments. That's the one unique exception. There was no argument between them. But Menachem leaves anyway, and Nichnas Shammai, we're going to have to wait to the Gemara to see why Menachem left. We'll have a Makhlok at Abaye and Rava about it. And who exactly was this Menachem? I'll talk about it in a little bit. Shammai omer shelo lismoch, Hillel omer lismoch. Okay, so then we end up that now, even though it says Shammai first here, really Hillel is the first one because it was Hillel Menachem, came out, Menachem goes in Hillel says lismoch, Shammai says lo lismoch. Okay, and we'll see this Makhlok more in the next Mishnah, which will come up in tomorrow's daf. Harishonim hayu nisiyim ushniim lahem av beitim. Okay, that's what I told you before. The first ones in every pair were the nasi, the second was the av beitim. We're going to see a Makhlok about this in a minute, though. Tanu Rabbanan, the Gemara quotes a Braita with a Makhlok about that issue. Shlosha mizugot rishonim shamru shelo lismoch, ushnayim mizugot achronim shamru lismoch. Rishonim hayu nisiyim ushniim lahem av beitim divrei Rabbi Meir. It's a bit of a complicated way to say it, but what he's saying is the first one in the first three pairs said nata lismoch, and they were the nisiim. And the second two said lismoch, and they were the nisiim, right? And the second ones in the Mishnah were the avot beitin, and that's what Rabbi Meir matches our Mishnah perfect. The chachamim omrim, but the rabbis say that there was one of them was flipped. Yehuda ben Tabai av beitin v'Shimon ben Shatach nasi. Yehuda ben Tabai was not the one in charge then. It was Shimon ben Shatach. He was the one in charge. Yehuda ben Tabai was secondary to him. So now we bring a very fascinating and bit of a tragic story, Montana, which actually has a bunch of parallels a little bit to the Acher story. Yehuda ben Tabai av beitin, Montana lahadetanu Rabbanan. This Braita that we're going to quote, who does it go like? The Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi, or Yehuda ben Tabai was the av beitin? So first we're going to read the whole Braita, and then we'll go back to our question. It'll take a little while to get back to the question. Amal Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai, nechama. I will see the nechama, which actually means I won't see the nechama. It's lashon saginahor, opposite language, where he's basically saying I should be punished. Im lo haragti ed zomem. In other words, what he's trying to say, it's a lot of double negatives. He's saying I should be rewarded basically because I killed an ed zomem. And what did I do that was so important about this ed zomem? Lo hotzimi liban shel tzdukim. Shayu omrim ein edim zomemim neharagim ad she'areg anidon. We know about these big battles between the tzdukim and the prushim. He wanted to prove his point. And he was basically saying, right, I basically did something really important. I killed an Eid Zomem to basically show that the Tzdukim were wrong in their interpretation. So we need a little background. What's an Eid Zomem? So there's something in the Torah called an Eid Zomem. It's a false witness. The problem with false witness is if I say somebody killed, right, and I say, come to court, me and someone else, we say, right, two people, we come and say so-and-so murdered. And then two people come and said, no, someone else murdered. That's called Edut HaKasha. We don't know. It's contradictory testimony. We don't know who's right, who's wrong. We basically throw everyone out of court, but nobody gets punished. But if we come and say so-and-so murdered so-and-so on this and this day, and we're going to learn all about this in Masechet Makot, and two people come and say, listen, you were with us on that day somewhere else, and there's no way you could have witnessed the murder, so you're clearly lying, then we become Edim Zomanim. We get the punishment, Kasher Zamam Lasot Lachi. Now, the case I describe is a murder case. So if we testified and it's whatever it is, if we said he owed money, then we have to pay the money. If we said he should get lashes, we'd have to get lashes. If we said he murdered, we get murdered. Now, the Torah says, Kasher zamam la'asot lachi. The punishment is whatever you tried to do to somebody else. Now, Kasher zamam, they say, v'lo kasher asa. So let's say we lied and we got the murderer killed. And then we became Edim Zomimim. Someone said you were lying. After the person got killed, we actually don't get punished according to the rabbis because it's only what we tried to do to someone else and not what we actually succeeded in doing. If we succeed, there's a whole story why that is. Okay, we're not going to get into this right now. I mean, I could give you some reasons, but we don't have time today. But we have a long time. We're going to get into this topic very much in depth when we get to Nezikin. Anyway, the point being specifically is Makot. The point being that Tzdukim said, no, we only punish you. What do you mean? We punish you for what you potentially were trying to do to someone? No, it's a crazy thing to say that. And really, the Torah calls this, the Gemara calls this a chidush, because really you didn't do anything. All you did was testify and try to get someone murdered, but you didn't actually murder them. So the Tzdukim said, only if you actually killed the person do you get killed. So comes Yehuda ben Tabai and he says, look what I did to show the Tzdukim they're wrong. I killed this Eid Zomem to prove to the everyone that we kill them even when they just tried to kill someone, and specifically when they tried to and not when they actually succeeded. Okay, so that's what he says. So I'm going to read it again inside, right? They would say, they only get killed if you actually kill the person who did it. So this sounds like a good thing he did. However, Amar lo Shimon ben Shetach, I will get punished if you didn't spill blood, meaning kind of like, I swear you spilled innocent blood. You were not supposed to kill this person. No, not because the Tzdukim were right. But why? You missed. Now, this is a great example of, at least the way I read this sugya. Sometimes you're fighting against someone, and it's such an important Makhlok for you that he was against the Tzdukim, and he wanted to prove his point so much that he went and murdered someone, but he lost sight of some very basic halacha. And it blinded him. So now what happens? It says, the rabbi said, if I go together with you and I lied, but you didn't, okay? And I become an Eid Zomem and you don't. Now, we drop our testimony because we don't have two witnesses, but I don't get punished. Why? Because me by myself, I could never have succeeded by myself in lying and getting someone convicted. So therefore, it's not kasher zamam laso lachiv. It's not that I could have done anything. Only if both of us become zomemim, then both of us get punished. And he killed one person. So what Shimon ben Shetach says, you made a catastrophic mistake. You killed someone for no reason. So now what's his reaction? He says, I promise I will never make a decision in court without you. Okay, you clearly know more than me. I'm clearly put in my place. It's interesting that he stays as the zug, right? If we talk about tshuva and all that, right? He stays as one of the zugot, but he says, I won't teach halacha but without you. Kol yamav. Now, at this point, we could stop and then try to figure out who does this go with. Was Yehuda ben Tabai in charge first and then kind of puts himself in position number two? That's what it sounds like. But before we do that, we're going to hear the end of the story, which is going to sound a little bit like the Acher story and the with the graves and things like that. Remember, the smoke was coming out of his grave. So, al kivro shaloto, kol yamav Yehuda ben Tabai hayam shtatech al kivro shaloto haru. The rest of his life, right? Tragic. He killed someone. He felt terrible about it. He used to just go and sit by the grave of that person. And he would cry or scream or I don't know what. And people heard voices coming from there. Now, people weren't sitting in the cemetery, so they didn't see that Yehuda ben Tabai was sitting there. They thought that they were hearing the voice of the dead body, right? They realized, everyone knew that he was killed unnecessarily. And they thought, just like there was smoke coming up out of Acher's grave, they thought it was the person's voice screaming about all the, whether he had been killed for no reason. And then they didn't realize Yehuda ben Tabai was kind of, felt bad about this all his life. So Amar lahem, he said to them, Kolihu, it's my voice you hear all the time. Teidu, you should know, Shalamachar mate. He talks about himself in the third person. Tomorrow he will die, meaning, right, at some point I'm going to die. Ve'en kolo nishma. And you won't hear my voice anymore. And then we'll prove to you, as soon as I'm dead, you won't hear the voice and you'll know that it was me. Okay, if you don't believe me, at least when I die, you'll know it's me. So Amar le Rav Acha b'rei Rav le Rav Ashi says, that's not a good proof. Why? Dilma piyuse paise. It could be that when Yehuda ben Tabai dies, he'll go up there and he'll make peace with him. And that's why the man will stop screaming. Alternatively, ibedina tave, or maybe he'll get sentenced in court above, and then the person will be satisfied at that point, okay, and he'll stop screaming. So that won't prove anything. That's the end of the story. Interesting, okay, where, again, not enough time to get into it, but all these interesting things about graves and things going on by graves after people's deaths. Maneha. So who is this according to? Iyamar Bishlama Rabbi Meir Damar Shimon ben Shetach Av Beit Din and Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai Nasi. That makes perfect sense. Hainu dekamori halacha b'fnei Shimon ben Shetach. That's why he says in the end, I'm going to teach only in front of Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. In other words, I used to be maybe I even still am the Nasi. And even though theoretically I could rule without my number two, I'm not going to. Okay. Hela. Iyamar Rabbanan. Da'amre Yehuda ben Tabai av beitin shema ben shatach nasi av beitin b'fnei nasi mimoreh halacha. Right? It doesn't make any sense, according to the rabbis, he was the Av Beit Din. How would he be teaching something without Shimon ben Shatach before this happened? Av Beit Din is always second to the one in charge. So they say, no, lo, my kibel alei dekamar litzdarufei afilu litzdarufei nami lo mitzarfina. In other words, it could be, yes, it's true, number one, and he's number two. But number two was allowed to make what we call a herkev of dayanim. He can make three judges with somebody else. He doesn't always have to judge with the nasi. And maybe he really was the Av Beit Din. And then after the story, he said, well, I'm not going to ever go with two other judges that don't include Shimon ben Shatach because I don't want to make a mistake. Okay, back to Menachem. Yatsa Menachem v'nichnas Shammai. Lehechan yatsa. Why did he leave? Abai Amar yatsa letarbut ra'ah. Like Acher, right? He went off the path. Okay. Rav Amar yatsa la'avodat hamelech. He left to go work for the king, which was Herod. Some people say this is really one and the same because to work for Herod basically is going out letarbut ra'ah. Some people say there's in Josephus, there's a person called Menachem the Essene, which is one of these, Dead Sea sects. And that maybe he was in Essene. And then that fits in very well with this whole thing, because we've been talking about the Stukim, and here he was in Essene, but yet in the leadership, and they kicked him out because they said, we don't want anyone from these kind of, they have different approaches to Judaism. They're on the outs. So that's another interpretation. There's not a lot, I should say. There's a bunch of things people write about him. We don't really know so much about him, right? Oh, so yeah, Gita, you're writing, he became a politician. And that's part of also what might be. You're saying it with a smiley, but I think that's part of the issue. He went into politics and they said, no, this is a Beit Midrash. This is not a place for politics, even though we know they were somewhat involved in politics, but it's another way of reading it. Okay, there's a lot to said here, but we have also some more interesting things to go and not a lot of time. Another bright to the support, they said, he went out with these 80 students he took with him wearing clothes either of the king or clothes of war. They basically went to leave. Okay. You shouldn't take rabbinic ordinances not seriously. Okay. Take them seriously. How do we know this? This whole issue of smicha was all about shvut, a Rabbanan. Can you use animals or not? You can see, by the way, and we're going to see this inside, he's clearly siding on the side that the Makhlok was all about, techav the smicha shchita, and can you use the animals on Yantif or not, right? Or do we allow it or not because you have no choice, right? Or maybe you have a choice and then don't do it on Yantif, as opposed to saying the issue is, do these sacrifices that are obligatory have an obligation of smicha to them? Okay, so anyway, we'll get back to that. But right now, assume you don't really know that yet. So now the Gemara says, Pshita, what do you mean? It's obvious that you have to take rabbinic ordinances seriously. That's what our whole religion is based upon, right? The Torah Baal Peh, the rabbis, all that. Again, it goes with this issue of the Stukim and the Prushim, right? But obviously we take this seriously. So Shvut mitzvah eats to each other. Well, they mean when there's a mitzvah involved. You might say here, well, it's true, you can't use animals, but here we're doing it for a mitzvah. Maybe it's permitted. That's what he comes to say. No, even when there's a mitzvah involved, take it seriously. To which the Gemara says, Hanami Pshita. That's also pretty obvious. We know just to do a mitzvah, you can't sin and go against the rabbis just to do a mitzvah. Well, here comes what I said before. It's to say, it's not that they were arguing about smicha. Do you need smicha for these types of korbanot? No, it was that they were arguing about Rabbanans. And that's why he says you can learn from here how important Rabbanans are, because the issue here was this rabbinic prohibition on Shabbat and Yantif to use animals, and that's what the issue was. Ama Rami Bar Chama, Shma Mina, Smicha B'Kol Chocho B'Ina. Rami Bar Chama says it must be, the Rabbi Yochanan holds, you can learn from him, that you need to do smicha with all your effort. Why? Because if it's just putting your hand lightly on the animal, that's not using the animal, that should be permitted. To which the Gemara brings, and here's our good source to end with, Meitive. Dabreu b'nei Yisrael, v'samach says, speak to the Jewish people, b'nei Yisrael in the masculine, and then it says, and do smicha. B'nei Yisrael samchim, b'ein b'nei Yisrael samchot. According to Tanakama, women can't do smicha. Rabbi Yossi, for Rabbi Shimon it should be, omrim b'nei Yisrael samchot reshut. They say if women want to, they can. This is why it's a very important topic about if women are exempt from something, can they do it? They say, yes, women can do it if they want. And Amar Rabbi Yossi, to prove it, Sachli Abba Elazar, he told me, Pamachat hayavanu egel shel zivchei shlamim. Okay, in the time of the temple, they tell this story. There was an egel, and hivi'u le'ezrat nashim b'samchu alav nashim. They brought it to the women. Now, this is a bit of a troublesome line. Lo mipnei shesmicha b'nashim, not because women are supposed to do smicha, You can read this in a positive way and a negative way, right? To make the women feel better, okay? Sort of, right? It's to make them, okay, now you could also view this as very positive, to make women feel part of things, right? Imagine everyone's in the temple, everyone's doing things, and the women are stuck on the side, right? Not doing anything. No, they said, you want to be part of this? We're going to let you be part of this, okay? That's why they let them do it. Not because they were obligated, but because they wanted to allow them to be part of it. So comes the Gemara and says like this, just to placate the women of Dina and Avodah B'Kodashim, we're going to allow them to, now we're talking about smicha, but kol kocho is not just using animals on Yantif. Here we're not necessarily talking about even on Yantif, we don't know. But the point is, these are sanctified animals. You can't just do what you want with sanctified animals. So if they're not obligated, then how can they put all their koach on the animals, all their might on it? It's not appropriate to use sanctified animals for this purpose. So they say, it must be you don't use all your might, because if you did, we wouldn't have allowed the women to do it just in order to placate them. To which the Gemara says, and this is a very fascinating and a bit of a troublesome line, and raised a lot of questions. A lot of Rishonim actually don't hold this way. But you really do need to amr lahu akfu yadaychu. But they told the women, don't do it that way. In other words, we're going to let you do the mitzvah, but we're not going to let you do it the right way. We're going to let you do it by just putting your hands on, because we don't want you to push your might on the animals. They're sanctified animals. On the other hand, you want to do it, so we'll make you, right? We'll placate you. Very, very nice, right? It does sound very patronizing. So it's very difficult to say this. To which the Gemara says, well, then it should have said, not lo mipnei shesmicha b'nashim and mipnei nacharuach, right? It should say, typically, de'ena l'smicha kla. You should have said they allowed the women to do it because it wasn't really smicha what they did. Okay, so to which they answer, Amar Rabbi Ami, chada ve'od kama. Really, it was a combination of both. Chada deleka l'smicha klal. Number one, they didn't do smicha at all. Ve'od kedei lasot nacharuach l'nashim. Now, this is a very troublesome Gemara. The only what gives me strength about this is that many Rishonim say this isn't true. Okay, they don't accept this. This was actually brought to answer a contradiction. Right? There are sound like you don't do smicha b'chol kocho, and then you do, and it sounded like the women weren't. How do you resolve it? But many of the Rishonim say no. If the women are going to do the mitzvah, they have to do it exactly the right way the mitzvah is done, and they don't hold like this, which sits with us much better, right? Because it would seem weird to give someone something to do that's not exactly the right way to do the mitzvah. The Rav talks about that also. There's no significance to a mitzvah if you don't, Rav Soloveitchik, that if you don't do it the right way. So it's a very strange sugya, and like I said, many Rishonim don't hold by it, so that's puts it in a bit of a better place. Okay, I want to just finish the daf. Again, we don't really have time for all this, but to finish up to the Mishnah, Amar Rav Papa, Shma minat stadim asulim. Rav Papa said you can infer from here. Oh, by the way, there's an article, I think I mentioned it, but from Drachea about this topic of mitzvah aseh shazman grama. Shma minat stadim asulim, v'isa kadatach tzadim utarim, lismach l'tzadim. Must be from here that you can't do smicha on the side of the animal, because if you did, they would have allowed you to do it on the head, let's say. And then you could have done that. So it must be it's asur, ela lav shmamina stadim asurim. It must be you can't do it on the side either. Otherwise, they would have allowed it on the head, because that's not really using the body. To which Rav Ashi says, what are you talking about? Rav Ashi Amal, filu temat stadim utarim, called bahade gaba ki gabadami. He says, no. Even if you say you can do it on the sides would be the head, and even on the head, it's the same as on the body. In other words, anything on the body would be using the animal, and therefore it doesn't teach you anything about whether the sides are okay or not. Okay, last thing I want to mention is I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but our learner's tapestry is up and the order forms are there. And there's a raffle that till Sunday. So you have really just till Sunday. You can hand in the tapestry anytime you want, but if you get it until Sunday, you'll be part of a raffle to win a set of Schottenstein Yevamot Gemaras, which are 3 volumes. It's a nice raffle prize. So, and we'll get you in all ready for Masechet Yevamot. So you can go on our site. It's easy to find the link to the tapestry and fill in your order form. And please be part of this exciting thing that we're preparing for Siyum Seder Moed. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.